Under the harsh fluorescent lights of Gate C-32, the moment shattered like glass. A sharp voice cut through the terminal, slicing the quiet hum of boarding calls and rolling suitcases. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. Now." The words froze everyone within earshot. Heads turned, conversations died mid-sentence, and at the center of the sudden stillness stood Eleanor Brooks, her worn leather carry-on hanging from one hand, her silver hair catching the light like a blade. She hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. The accusation was already echoing through the air around her, heavy and humiliating. People watched the way they watched a storm forming, powerless, uneasy, expecting thunder. The agent blocking her path was young, maybe late 20s, her jaw clenched tight enough to tremble. She held a printed manifest as if it were a shield. Her name tag read, Alison Pierce. Her eyes, sharp and suspicious, raked over Eleanor from head to toe, pausing at the scuffed bag, then at the faint crease on her ticket. "Your boarding pass isn't valid for this cabin," she said, each syllable clipped. "Please move out of the priority lane." She spoke loudly, too loudly, clearly wanting an audience. Eleanor's heartbeat pressed quietly against her ribs, steady but weighty, like someone knocking from the inside. Her voice came low, calm, almost gentle. "It's valid. Check your system again." But Alison didn't check anything. She simply shook her head with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, then stepped closer, invading the small circle of dignity Eleanor fought to maintain. "Don't make this uncomfortable," she warned. "Let's not hold up other passengers." She angled her body so others could see she was the one in control, a classic maneuver. Eleanor had seen it before in boardrooms where people smiled while pushing a knife. Behind them, an older man waiting in line cleared his throat impatiently. His cane tapped once against the carpet, sharp, judgmental. Another passenger, a woman in her 70s with neat grey curls, whispered to her husband. "Some people always try to squeeze where they don't belong." The words were soft, but they carried. They always carried. Eleanor felt them land, one by one, like dust settling on old wounds. The hum of the airport returned, but now altered an undercurrent of tension. Curiosity, subtle disapproval threading through the crowd. Eleanor's spine straightened only slightly, but enough. Inside her chest, something quiet locked into place, like a mechanism resetting. She lifted her gaze to Alison and waited, giving her a chance, a final one, to correct herself, to choose decency over spectacle. But Alison lifted her chin instead, signaling a nearby supervisor with 2 brisk finger motions. The supervisor arrived with the hurried gate lounge shuffle of someone already behind on tasks. His name, Frank Hollis, floated on a badge pinned slightly crooked to his shirt. He looked tired, worn down, the kind of man whose good intentions had been thinned over time by long hours and thin patience. He didn't acknowledge Eleanor at first. He spoke to Alison instead. "What's going on?" Alison's voice dropped to a register meant to sound professional, but rang with underlying judgment. "Possible misuse of a first-class ticket. Passenger refusing to step aside." Frank exhaled slowly, an irritated sigh that suggested inconvenience, not concern. He finally turned toward Eleanor, and something in his expression flickered recognition perhaps, or surprise, but he smoothed it away too quickly to identify. "Ma'am, let me see your ticket," he said. Eleanor handed it over her movements, measured. Frank scanned it, tapped a few keys on the nearby terminal, and frowned not at her, but at the screen. Then he tapped again harder, as if force might make the truth change. He leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The system shows a mismatch," he said reluctantly. "Your reservation doesn't appear under this seat assignment." "It's in your system," Eleanor replied. "You're just not looking in the right place." Her tone was calm, but there was something beneath it, an edge, a depth that made Frank hesitate. Before he could respond, another voice joined them from a few feet back in line. "Is there a problem?" It was a man in his early 60s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that held stories in its lines. His name, as Eleanor recognized far too well, was Roland Tate. He was a retired Air Force colonel, now a frequent commentator on aviation safety. Respected, listened to, and at this particular moment, dangerously misinformed. He stepped closer, studying Eleanor like a puzzle he didn't enjoy solving. She cutting the line or something, he asked. The implication lingered in the air. Eleanor turned her head slightly toward him, not fully just enough to acknowledge she heard. Resentment flickered briefly across her features, though she buried it before it surfaced. "Just a misunderstanding," she said softly. But misunderstandings had consequences. Frank straightened. "I'm going to need to call down aviation services," he said. "We need to verify her booking manually." Allison shot him a triumphant glance. The crowd shifted, an uneasy ripple moving through them. People hate delays. People hate disruption. And the easiest person to blame is the one at the center of the storm, regardless of whether she built the storm or merely stood in it. Eleanor felt the weight of their stares settle over her like a wet coat. She didn't flinch. Instead, she inhaled through her nose, slow and quiet. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers didn't tremble. They moved with deliberate precision, tapping a message she'd hoped not to send. Across the terminal, unnoticed by almost everyone, a young maintenance worker paused near a service panel. He had been watching the scene out of the corner of his eye for several minutes, now his brows drawn tight in suspicion. His name was Miguel Alvarez, and unlike the others, he knew exactly who Eleanor Brooks was. He had sat in the back row of a safety symposium where she'd spoken 2 years earlier, calm, brilliant, uncompromising, a woman whose words carried weight. He recognized her instantly, though he doubted she remembered him. His heartbeat quickened as he watched Allison block her path again, this time standing slightly squared off her feet planted. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. And he wasn't the kind of man who ignored wrong. Meanwhile, Eleanor's message sent only a brief line, nothing dramatic. A confirmation request to someone who would understand the urgency. She locked her screen, lifted her chin, and quietly said, "You're making an error you don't want to escalate." Allison let out a short, incredulous laugh. Is that some kind of threat? Eleanor held her gaze for a long beat. "It's a warning," she said. "And it's kinder than you realize." For a moment, no one breathed. A shift, subtle but unmistakable, moved through the air like the faint metallic taste before lightning strikes. Miguel stepped forward from the service panel, hesitation warring with conviction. "Excuse me," he called out. His voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I think you need to run that reservation again." "In the executive database?" Frank turned toward him, annoyed. "This doesn't concern maintenance." "It does," Miguel replied, surprising even himself. "If you're about to humiliate the wrong person." His words struck the space between them like a dropped tool on concrete, loud, undeniable, altering the shape of the moment entirely. For the first time since the confrontation began, Allison's confidence fractured. She glanced at Frank, waiting for reassurance. But Frank looked at her differently now, uncertainty beginning to bloom in the back of his eyes. Eleanor didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't soften. She simply stood there, composed, watching the pieces shift into place exactly as she knew they eventually would. A storm was forming, but this time she wasn't the one standing in the center. She was the one drawing the line where the lightning would strike. And somewhere deep in the airport, a phone began to ring, the first tremor of a truth about to surface. Frank's phone buzzed before he could respond to Miguel, the vibration rattling lightly against the metal podium. He glanced down, expecting a routine internal message, something about boarding pace or an equipment delay. Instead, his tired eyes sharpened. A red banner stretched across the top of the screen, Priority Alert Executive Verification Requested. His breath hitched, subtle but visible. He tapped the message once read silently, then lifted his gaze toward Eleanor like he was seeing her for the first time. The shift unsettled Allison, who stepped back half an inch, her confidence faltering, as if someone had kicked out the first rung of a ladder she stood on. Eleanor remained still, not triumphant, not smug, just quiet. Waiting. Her calmness unnerved the cluster of passengers around her more than any outburst could have. Human beings understand anger. They don't understand composure in the face of injustice. It feels unnatural, almost dangerous. The terminal loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing pre-boarding for a flight at Gate C-29, but the sound felt distant, drowned beneath the tension thickening around Gate C-32. The older man with the cane shifted his weight and cleared his throat again, less sure of himself now. The woman with the grey curls gripped her husband's arm, whispering, "Why is the supervisor looking at her like that?" He didn't have an answer. Frank's jaw worked silently as he swallowed hard, then tapped a second alert. This one pulled up a name, a title, a department. His hand trembled before he steadied it on the counter. He turned the screen slightly away, as if shielding sensitive information from wandering eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. "Ma'am, could you step over here for a moment?" The formality in his tone was new, cautious, almost deferential. Allison blinked at him, confused. "Frank, what are you?" He raised a hand to stop her. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone but Eleanor. "I need to verify something privately." Miguel's heart thudded once hard. He recognized that tone, the sound of someone suddenly realizing the ground beneath them wasn't solid. He took one step closer, just enough to be within reach if this spiraled further. But Eleanor didn't move. She didn't indulge the request. Her voice remained soft, barely louder than a breath. "Whatever needs to be verified, you can verify it right here." Her gaze flicked briefly toward the surrounding passengers, since the accusation happened publicly. Frank hesitated, a man accustomed to authority, now unsure how much he still had. He glanced around, realizing the crowd was growing, not hostile, just curious. But curiosity had pressure. It pushed truth to the surface, whether people wanted it or not. Roland Tate folded his arms, watching intently. Something in his eyes, a shift from judgment to analysis. He was studying Eleanor now, calculating, re-evaluating. Old military instincts firing quietly. Then another sound pierced the moment footsteps, quick, purposeful ones approaching from the concourse. A woman in a navy blazer with an ID lanyard appeared airport operations. Her name tag read Denise Caldwell, early 50s. Sharp-eyed. No nonsense. She scanned the area with the precision of someone accustomed to stepping into messes others created. "Frank," she said, not bothering with greetings, "I need a status update." Frank cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. We may have a reservation conflict. Passenger is claiming. Claiming, Eleanor repeated softly. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, then forced himself to continue. Passenger Brooks is stating that her boarding pass is valid for first class, but the system showed a mismatch. Denise turned to Eleanor. May I see your ID and boarding pass, please? She spoke professionally, not warm, but not hostile. Eleanor handed both over without a word. Denise read the name once, twice. Her lips parted slightly. She swallowed. Then she stepped away, tapping something into her tablet with rapid, almost nervous precision. After a moment, she returned. Her demeanor changed, firmer, more alert. Ms. Brooks, she said carefully, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you recently been involved in any formal oversight or audit processes related to this airline? A ripple passed through the crowd. Allison stiffened. Frank's eyes widened. Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She simply said, yes. Roland Tate inhaled sharply, a quiet realization dawning over his face. Miguel's eyes widened too. He had known she was important, but not this important. Denise tapped her tablet again, verifying the information she already suspected. Then she turned to Frank, her expression tightening, voice dropping to a low, reprimanding tone, meant only for him, but heard by everyone. The system didn't mismatch. Her reservation was moved into the executive clearance category this morning. It doesn't populate in the standard view. Allison's face drained. Executive clearance. What does that even mean? Frank swayed slightly where he stood. It means, he said slowly, her travel is connected to oversight relating to carrier operations. The words hit like a cold wind. Oversight. Carrier operations. People didn't need full definitions. They knew weight when they heard it. Eleanor reached for her documents, and Denise placed them gently in her hand, not returned, but offered like something sacred. Ms. Brooks. Denise said, voice steady, though her posture was different, now respectful, careful. I apologize for the inconvenience. We clearly mishandled this situation, and I'll be filing the incident for internal review. Before Eleanor could respond, Allison blurted, I didn't know who she was. Miguel cut her off, voice sharper than before. Why would it matter who she is? You shouldn't treat any passenger like that. Silence blanketed the gate. The truth inside his words rang too loudly to ignore. Allison flinched as if struck. Frank looked away. Denise exhaled. Ma'am, please follow me. We'll get you boarded properly. She turned to address the passengers. Gate C32 will resume general boarding shortly. Thank you for your patience. But Eleanor didn't move. Not yet. She looked around the older woman, clutching her husband's arm, the man with the cane. The retired colonel, watching her with renewed interest, Miguel still standing protectively at the edge of the confrontation. She felt their eyes, their assumptions, their quiet recalculations. Her voice, when it came, was steady, almost tender, carrying an exhaustion that ran deeper than this moment. This isn't about who I am. It's about how quickly people decide who they think someone is. The words struck the gate like a moral verdict. Roland Tate stepped forward, cane tapping once against the floor. Ms. Brooks, he said, I misjudged you. That one's on me. Eleanor inclined her head in acknowledgement, born not forgiveness. Denise motioned again toward the jet bridge. This time Eleanor moved slowly, dignified her posture straight, though her shoulders carried the weight of decades of similar moments. As she passed Miguel, she stopped. just for a breath. "Thank you," she said. Miguel shook his head. "I just didn't like the way they talked to you. That's why it matters," she replied. Then she continued toward the boarding door. Frank rubbed a hand down his face, shame washing over him in slow waves. Allison stood rigid, staring at the floor, her cheeks burning. Denise turned toward both of them with a subdued fury in her eyes, a fury reserved not for mistakes, but for failures of judgment. And somewhere deep inside the airport network, an automated system updated Eleanor Brooks's travel file with a single note: "Priority oversight traveler, handle with full compliance." A note no one at gate C32 would ever forget the meaning of. The boarding door hadn't even closed when the real trouble began. Eleanor felt it before she saw it, a vibration in the air, a tightening as though the cabin itself sensed a shift it wasn't ready for. She stepped into first class, the muted gold lighting washing over her like a spotlight she didn't ask for. Passengers glanced up from newspapers and tablets, their eyes flicking between her and the flight attendants, with small, puzzled frowns. Something unspoken hovered there, a story unfolding behind the seams. 2 attendants stood near the front galley, whispering in low, urgent voices. One of them, a tall man in his 40s named Brandon Shaw, shot Eleanor a quick look, curiosity first, then caution. He straightened his posture, smoothing his tie the way people do when they sense someone important, but aren't sure why. "Welcome aboard," he said, voice polite but strained. "Seat 2A correct?" Eleanor nodded. Brandon stepped aside for her to pass, but his eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. People always notice when the gate drama walks down their aisle. No one ever admits it, but everyone watches. She placed her bag under the seat. The leather groaned softly, a reminder of how long she'd carried it and how long she'd had to carry herself. Across the aisle sat an older gentleman, maybe early 70s, with crisp white hair and a navy blazer. He lifted his gaze, offered a nod, not warm, but gentlemanly. His name was printed on the boarding manifest, still in Brandon's hand. Richard Halstead, retired judge. Federal. The kind of man who looked at people and filed them into categories out of habit. He studied her for a moment, too long, then returned to his newspaper. Not a dismissal, something closer to curiosity with restraint. Eleanor settled into her seat, feeling the subtle shift of the aircraft beneath her as the crew prepared for pushback. She inhaled, held it, released it slowly. The incident at the gate still hung on her skin like static. She could feel it pulsing behind her ribs. Brandon stepped closer. "Ma'am, before we depart, I need to confirm something with you." His tone held no accusation, but there was something uneasy flickering under it, something inherited from whatever rumor had already spread through the staff. "Of course," Eleanor replied. He hesitated. There was a notation added to your profile a few minutes ago. "Priority oversight traveler. Could you clarify your role with the airline?" He tried to sound casual. He failed. Eleanor didn't look at him at first. She kept her eyes on the soft reflection in the glass partition ahead, the shape of a woman who'd spent a lifetime being asked for explanations she shouldn't have to give. Then she turned her head, meeting his gaze. "I conduct regulatory evaluations," she said. "Independent contract work. My travel is sometimes reviewed differently." Brandon blinked, absorbing the response. Not enough to reveal her deeper connection, just enough to shift the balance. "Understood," he said quietly. He walked back to the galley, but not before glancing at the flight manifest again, as though the paper itself might rearrange to match what he'd just learned. The cabin settled for exactly 20 seconds. Then a loud metallic thud cracked through the aisle like a gunshot. The entire first-class cabin jolted. Halstead's newspaper slipped from his hands. Eleanor's fingers curled around the armrest as the aircraft rocked once more, not violently, but sharply enough to steal the breath from half the passengers. Brandon rushed forward, nearly colliding with the curtain. "What was that?" he muttered under his breath. Another attendant appeared behind him, pale and tense. "It came from cargo hold 2, she whispered. Sensors flagged a shift, a cargo shift before takeoff. Unusual, dangerous, and absolutely requiring delay." Captain Rosen appeared in the doorway to the cockpit, tall mid-50s, weathered in a way that suggested he'd seen more than any flight manual could teach. His jaw tightened as he listened to Brandon's report. "Lock the cabin," he ordered. "No movement, no service." "I'm notifying ground control." Passengers murmured in confusion. A couple in their 60s gripped hands tightly. A younger man cursed under his breath. Halstead folded his arms, annoyance lining his face. Eleanor watched the cockpit door close again with a quiet click. It was a sound she'd heard many times, each representing a decision being made on the other side. Brandon walked past her row. He was sweating now, barely visibly, but enough for Eleanor to notice the tremor in his hands. She spoke softly as he approached. It sounded concentrated, not a general shift. Brandon paused. "Excuse me, the impact location." It was localized. Something heavy moved abruptly. His brows pulled together. "You know cargo dynamics." She held his stare, neither confirming nor denying. It would be wise to check the restraining rails on the secondary pallet system. If the locking pins weren't engaged fully, a shift like that can cause problems. He swallowed. Hard. "I'll notify the captain." He hurried toward the cockpit. Halstead watched the exchange with renewed interest. His voice came low, gravelly. "You sound like someone who knows more than she's letting on." "I sound like someone who's flown enough to recognize trouble," Eleanor replied. He didn't challenge her. He simply nodded that same gentlemanly nod from earlier, but now shaded with respect. A few rows behind a younger passenger, a woman in her 40s with cropped blonde hair leaned forward. "Is there something wrong with the plane?" Her voice carried the tremor of someone who'd lost control in the sky once before. Eleanor turned, offering a calm she didn't quite feel. "They're taking precautions. That's the right thing." The woman nodded, visibly reassured, and sat back. Then the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Folks, we're going to hold position at the gate while we investigate an irregular cargo indicator. For your safety, we need everyone seated." Irregular. A careful word. Brandon re-emerged from the cockpit and approached Eleanor, leaning in slightly so others couldn't hear. "The captain wants to know how you knew that." Her heartbeat thumped once in her chest. Not fear inevitability. "I recognized the pattern," she said. "I've heard it before." Brandon stared at her, piecing things together, with the slow, dawning awareness of a man realizing he had underestimated someone standing 6 inches from him. His eyes dropped briefly to her hands, steady, composed, then back to her face. "Ms. Brooks, are you here on an audit?" The question hovered. Heavy. Loaded. Eleanor let the silence stretch tension coiling through the cabin like a tightening wire. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own revelation. Before Brandon could respond, a new voice rose from mid-cabin. "Excuse me." A man in his 60s stood abruptly, one hand bracing the overhead bin, the other gripping his phone. His face flushed red. "Why are we being delayed? Some of us have real deadlines. I need to know what's going on." Brandon turned toward him. "So please take your seat." "No," the man said, pointing directly at Eleanor. "I saw what happened at the gate. This all started when she boarded. Now the plane's having problems." Someone explained this. The accusation rolled through the cabin like a slow, poisonous fog. Passengers turned again. Halstead stiffened. The blonde woman clutched her armrests. Miguel, who had slipped into the plane, unnoticed at the back to deliver a maintenance report, froze halfway up the aisle, eyes locked on Eleanor. For the first time, Eleanor's expression shifted barely but unmistakably. A small, cold flicker of anger surfaced beneath her calm. Not at the delay. Not at the fear. At the ease with which blame always found the same target. She stood slowly. The cabin went still. Her voice came quiet, but it carried. "The delay has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the aircraft you're sitting in, and whether the people responsible for it followed proper procedure." The man scoffed. "And who are you to know that?" Eleanor held his gaze, unblinking. Someone inhaled sharply behind her. Halstead leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Brandon froze mid-step. Miguel barely breathed. Eleanor finally answered. "Someone who knows exactly what should have been done," she said. "And exactly what happens when it isn't." The man's confidence faltered for the first time. Outside on the tarmac, 2 maintenance vehicles rolled toward the aircraft. Inside, every pair of eyes shifted to Eleanor with a new awareness, uneasy questioning, and on the edge of understanding that she was not simply a passenger caught in an inconvenience. She was something else. Something the airline had not expected. And the truth of her identity was no longer a question of if it would emerge, only when. The maintenance lights outside washed the cabin in slow pulses of amber, each flash carving sharper angles into the tension hanging motionless in the air. Eleanor remained standing for a heartbeat longer, long enough for every passenger to register the weight in her posture. Then she eased back into her seat with controlled grace, as though lowering a verdict onto the aircraft itself. Brandon swallowed visibly as he prepared to walk the aisle again, but the cockpit door opened first. Captain Rosen stepped out, his expression firm but shadowed with something new. Not fear, but the faint dread of a man realizing the problem he'd been handed was larger than the metal he was trained to fly. "We're holding until maintenance signs off," he announced to the cabin. "Please, stay seated." His gaze swept the aisle, landing briefly on Eleanor. There was a crackle of recognition in his eyes, not of her identity, but of the shift in authority, happening subtle yet unstoppable, right in his cabin. He gave her a small nod, an acknowledgement. Then he retreated back into the cockpit. The blonde woman in row 4 whispered to her husband. "Something's not right, Tom." She wasn't talking about the cargo anymore. Miguel reached Eleanor's row, his maintenance tablet gripped tightly. "Do you mind if I—" He gestured toward the empty space beside her, not wanting to intrude. "Sit," she said gently. He lowered himself quickly, as though afraid the offer might vanish. His voice was low. "I didn't want to make things worse back there." "You didn't," Eleanor replied. "You did exactly what someone should have done." Miguel exhaled shakily, then lowered his voice further. "The rails on pallet 2 shouldn't have shifted. They were checked this morning." His hands tightened on the tablet. "Or they were supposed to be." Eleanor turned toward him fully, her expression sharpening. "Are you telling me you think the check wasn't performed?" Miguel hesitated. then nodded. We're understaffed this week. A few new hires, some training gaps. The work orders have been rushed. He lowered his eyes, ashamed. And someone signed off the inspection in under 20 seconds. That's not possible. The truth felt heavy in the space between them. Eleanor reacted with no surprise, just a quiet, resigned sorrow that settled in her chest like a stone. She'd seen procedural shortcuts before. They always left debris, sometimes metal, sometimes human. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Before he could respond, the man who had accused her earlier, the one with the harsh voice and the schedule too important to delay, rose again. "I'm not sitting here without answers," he snapped. "What kind of cargo issue delays a plane this long? And why is maintenance interviewing passengers instead of checking the damn plane?" Sir Brandon warned, walking quickly toward him. "No," the man barked. "I deserve to know what's happening. We all do." He pointed again at Eleanor. "She clearly knows something. Let her explain it." All eyes turned back to Eleanor. She didn't answer. She didn't speak. She looked at him, just looked, and something inside her gaze, something centuries old and weary, forced him back half a step. Judge Halstead finally broke the silence. His voice was calm, judicial, but faintly trembling. "So sit down. You're not helping anyone right now." The man bristled. "And what authority do you have?" Halstead held his stare. Enough to recognize when someone is digging himself deeper. The man swallowed and sank into his seat, his false bravado folding in on itself. Brandon moved past him, but he didn't go to the galley. He stopped beside Eleanor instead. "I just got word," he said softly. "Maintenance found one of the forward rails disengaged. They're tightening the restraint pins now." Eleanor's jaw tightened. The plane shouldn't depart until they run full torque verification. Brandon stiffened. "Ms. Brooks, with all due respect, you sound like someone operating above my pay grade." Miguel whispered. "She is." Brandon blinked. What before either of them could elaborate a new presence appeared at the front of the cabin. A woman in a blazer and ID badge. Airport operations again, but a different representative this time. Linda Farrow, Director of Airside Logistics. Her expression was tense, controlled the expression of someone who had walked into a situation that was already spiraling beyond comfortable boundaries. She approached Eleanor first, an act that didn't go unnoticed by any passenger. "Miss Brooks," she said, her tone respectful but tight. "Could I speak with you privately at the front?" Passengers murmured. Eleanor didn't stand. "Whatever needs saying can be said here." Linda hesitated. "Ms. Brooks, what I need to discuss may relate to an ongoing compliance matter. It would be more appropriate." "It began publicly," Eleanor said quietly. "It can continue publicly." Halstead's eyebrows rose slightly. The blonde woman leaned forward. Even the impatient man seemed struck silent. Linda exhaled, bracing herself. "We just received a notification from the Aviation Oversight Bureau. They've been tracking irregularities in ground operations at this airport for several months. Your presence today was flagged as a supervisory audit." A hush rippled through the cabin. Brandon froze mid-step. Miguel stared, wide-eyed. The man in the back sputtered, "Audit." "What kind of audit?" Linda continued, her voice steady but increasingly reverent. "Ms. Brooks, I didn't recognize your name at first. But you have the highest level credentials granted to an independent evaluator under federal aviation contract. You have authority to trigger a procedural review of any flight crew, ground crew, or operational decision deemed hazardous. Every seatbelt creaked as passengers leaned in closer. The accusation at the gate, the cargo incident, the tension in the cabin. It all realigned around her. Brandon whispered, "Jesus!" The man who had mocked her earlier covered his mouth with a shaking hand. Halstead let out a slow breath. "So that's it," he murmured. The real reason she knew. Linda tightened her grip on the folder she carried. "We have additional concerns. The rail mechanism that shifted today has been part of 3 separate complaints in the last month. The Bureau suspected procedural lapses. Today's incident confirms it." Eleanor looked steadily at Linda. "How many flights used that pallet system this week?" Linda hesitated. "Too many." The word settled with a cold weight. Passengers exchanged glances. Fear, anger, disbelief. For the first time, Eleanor allowed her voice to harden just enough to cut. This wasn't a minor oversight. This was a systemic failure, and someone tried to bury it. Linda nodded gravely. "We believe you were not the only oversight traveler assigned to monitor the situation. Another evaluator filed a report yesterday." "Who?" Eleanor asked. Linda looked down at the folder as though it were burning her hands. His name was Arthur Brooks. The cabin froze. Eleanor's breath caught. Only for a second, but it was enough. Halstead saw it. Miguel saw it. Even Brandon felt it. Linda continued softly. "We never received his full report. He was scheduled to fly out on a connecting route last night. He didn't board." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the armrests, her composure steel until now fractured at the edges. Linda took a small breath. "I'm sorry. I wasn't aware he was your brother." A wave of whispers rushed through the cabin. Halstead closed his eyes in understanding. Miguel's chest tightened. Brandon, stunned, said nothing. The blonde woman put a trembling hand over her mouth. The man who had attacked Eleanor earlier whispered barely audible, "My God." Eleanor looked down for the first time since the confrontation began. Her voice came low, steady, wounded. "He told me last week he suspected something. He said someone didn't want the paperwork traced." Linda nodded. "The Bureau believes your presence today may have been compromised. Someone at ground level tried to misroute your reservation. That's why the gate system failed to recognize your clearance. The truth gathered like storm clouds, thick and suffocating. This wasn't just cargo negligence. This wasn't just discrimination. This was sabotage, systemic, deliberate, and connected to her brother." Eleanor lifted her gaze again, and when she did, every person in the cabin felt the gravity of it. Her calm was no longer a shield. It was a weapon. She inhaled once the smallest tremor passing through her chest. Then she stood, not slowly, not dramatically, but with a precision that carried the weight of purpose. "Tell the captain," she said, voice cold and clear, "no one leaves this gate until I review the maintenance logs myself." Linda nodded instantly without hesitation, because now everyone in the cabin understood the truth. Eleanor Brooks wasn't just here on an audit. She was here on unfinished business, and the reason she boarded this flight had just become something far more personal and far more dangerous than anyone realized. The moment Linda hurried toward the cockpit, the cabin shifted into a strange electric silence, one thick enough that even the hum of the air vents felt intrusive. Eleanor remained standing in the aisle, her fingers lightly curled at her sides, every muscle held in quiet control. No one spoke. No one even rustled a magazine. It was the kind of silence that forms when strangers realize they've all stepped into something much larger than a delayed flight, Judge Halstead leaned toward her slightly, his voice pitched low. "Miss Brooks, your brother. Was he investigating the same maintenance failures?" Eleanor didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on the cockpit door where Linda had disappeared. "He told me there were inconsistencies," she said quietly, "and that someone on the ground crew was altering reports." Her jaw tightened, barely perceptible. He didn't think it was accidental. Halstead studied her profile, the lines of pain she tried to hide. "And now you believe it wasn't a coincidence he went missing." "It was never a coincidence," she replied. Behind them, a woman in row 3 whispered to her seatmate. "This is turning into something else, entirely." Her voice carried the tremble of someone who wasn't sure whether to be frightened or fascinated. The man who had confronted Eleanor earlier, the one who had demanded answers with the arrogance of someone accustomed to being right now, sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, remorse etched deep into every line of his face. He didn't look at Eleanor. He didn't deserve to yet. Brandon stepped closer to her, his voice subdued. "Ms. Brooks, if you think someone tampered with the cargo rail to create a safety issue, they did," Eleanor said, not harshly, but with an absolute certainty that sent a cold shiver up his spine. "And they've been doing it for weeks, enough to mask patterns, enough to compromise inspections, enough to make an evaluator disappear." The last words came quieter, as though she had to push them through a wall of grief. Miguel watched her with a mix of fear and admiration. He'd looked up to her since the first time he'd heard her speak at that symposium, but seeing her here violated, underestimated grieving, yet somehow stronger for it. He realized something profound. She wasn't just knowledgeable. She was relentless, a force that didn't bend. Suddenly the cockpit door opened again. Captain Rosen stepped out, his face pale but resolute. Linda followed him, carrying a digital tablet and an aging binder of maintenance paperwork, dog-eared, overused, and suspiciously thin for the past month. "Ms. Brooks Rosen," said, "I've been informed of your credential level. You're authorized to review any operational logs relevant to a safety concern." He exhaled tightly. "And I'm requesting your assistance." Passengers exchanged looks, relief that someone competent was taking charge, mixed with the uneasy thrill of watching a gear deep inside the aviation machine grind into motion. "Bring the logs," Eleanor said. They moved toward the front galley, where the narrow counter space provided just enough room to spread the documents. The passengers leaned, craning their necks subtly, without standing. They knew better now than to interrupt. Linda opened the binder. The first pages were normal, routine, clean, too clean. Eleanor's eyes hardened. Procedures that usually filled 10 pages of detailed check marks were reduced to 2 lines of generic affirmation, and this pattern repeated again and again. She tapped a section with her index finger. "Who signed this?" Linda checked the initials. "G.C." Miguel inhaled sharply. "Gerald Cole!" His voice cracked with disbelief. "He's been training new hires for months. He's respected. Everyone listens to him." Eleanor's face didn't move, but the stillness became sharper. Respect doesn't erase motive. Captain Rosen crossed his arms tightly. "Cole worked cargo last night. He signed the shift logs for the early routes, and he signed the pre-dawn inspection," Linda added. Eleanor shook her head. "No, he didn't inspect anything." She reached for the digital tablet. "Show me the timestamp metadata." Linda hesitated. "You think he falsified? I know he did." Her voice turned icy, the kind of cold that wasn't born of anger, but of truth too painful to soften. Arthur sent me an encrypted message last Friday. He said Cole was rushing inspections, clearing pallets without looking at them, overriding system alerts to keep turnaround times low. He said he was going to report him. Miguel's voice dropped to a whisper. And then he disappeared. The truth hit the cabin like invisible shrapnel. Passengers shifted, some covering their mouths, others gripping their armrests as though turbulence had struck. For many of them, people in their 60s, 70s, lifelong travelers, the idea that safety logs were being falsified felt like a personal betrayal. Aviation was sacred to them, a promise of care, trust, duty. To violate that was like violating a national contract. Halstead rose from his seat, leaning heavily on his cane. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "if your brother threatened to expose this man, and that man controlled the inspection logs," he trailed off, letting the implication settle dark and undeniable. Eleanor didn't look away from the documents. "He made Arthur disappear," she said quietly, "and he tried to make me disappear too. Misroute the reservation, hide my clearance, push me through a gate with staff who wouldn't recognize federal tags. If I hadn't intervened the moment that cargo rail shifted, Brandon finished the thought for her. We could have had a mid-air incident." A murmur, sharp as a gasp, swept through the cabin. The man who had insulted her earlier stood suddenly chest-heaving. "Miss Brooks," his voice trembled. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Eleanor finally met his eyes. There was no forgiveness there. But no hatred either, just a tired kind of understanding. "People rarely do," she said. "Until they have to." Captain Rosen turned toward Linda. "I need Cole detained. Immediately." Linda nodded. "Airport security is already looking for him. His shift ended 60 minutes ago. He hasn't clocked out." Miguel whispered. "He's still here." Eleanor closed the binder with a decisive snap. "Then trust me, he's not finished." Rosen stared at her, intuition dawning. "You think he sabotaged this flight on purpose?" "He sabotaged the entire system," Eleanor replied. "This flight is just the first one I happened to catch." Passengers shivered not from cold, but from the realization that they were sitting inside a story they would retell for the rest of their lives, one where a seemingly ordinary woman uncovered an invisible danger larger than any of them imagined. Linda leaned toward the captain. "We should evacuate the aircraft." "No," Eleanor said sharply. "That's exactly what he wants. Chaos. Confusion. A crowded jet bridge where someone could slip away." Rosen frowned. "What are you suggesting, that we lock down the perimeter?" Eleanor said. "Quietly. And that we keep this plane sealed until security confirms Cole's location." Halstead's voice rumbled from behind. "She's right. If the man is desperate, the last thing you want is a stampede." Miguel nodded. "Cole knows this airport inside out. If he runs now, they'll never find him." Rosen inhaled slowly. "Then we hold." The decision rippled through the cabin, fear-relief tension coiling tighter. Eleanor leaned over the binder again, scanning the signatures, the incomplete time stamps, the falsified forms. Her brother's handwriting appeared on one page, a notation only someone close to him would recognize. She touched it briefly with her fingertips, a silent acknowledgement of the man who'd warned her, the man who'd vanished trying to protect lives he'd never meet. She whispered, "Arthur, what did you uncover?" The plane remained sealed. Outside security vehicles circled. Inside, 78 souls waited in a suspended breath between danger and revelation. And Eleanor Brooks, steady as steel, prepared for the moment everything would break open, because the man who caused all of this wasn't just hiding somewhere in the airport. He was running out of time. and she was done letting him stay in the shadows. The seconds dragged with the weight of minutes as the aircraft sat sealed at the gate lights dimmed to a tense, cinematic hush. No one moved. Passengers who had once been irritated or impatient now sat frozen in a collective, instinctive stillness, the kind that fills a room when danger is close but unseen. Outside, the rhythmic sweep of amber beacons from circling security trucks spilled through the cabin windows like a warning. Eleanor stood near the galley, the maintenance binder open beside her, the digital logs glowing faintly in Linda Farrow's trembling hands. Her posture didn't waver. She looked like a woman carved from resolve, a blunt reminder that strength sometimes comes in silence, not spectacle. Captain Rosen reappeared from the cockpit, tension etched across his brow. Security's sweeping ground level near Cargo Bay 2, he said. Cole's badge hasn't registered on any door sensors for 30 minutes. Eleanor absorbed this with a slow nod. He won't use his badge. He knows better. Then how do we find him? Brandon asked. We don't, Eleanor replied quietly. We deny him exits. Linda's voice cracked. He's desperate. We can't predict what a cornered man will do. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. That's exactly why we contain the threat. Quietly. Behind them, Judge Halstead leaned forward in his seat, cane resting between his knees. Miss Brooks, he said, voice steady. What's your end game here? To make sure no one else disappears for doing their job, she answered. Including my brother. A hush fell so deep that even the ventilation seemed to pause out of respect. Suddenly the intercom crackled, with static jolting the cabin. Attention ground units, a voice said, security dispatch. We have motion detected behind utility corridor B. Possible unauthorized personnel. Proceed with caution. Miguel's face drained. That corridor connects to the service elevators. If he reaches them, he'll vanish into the maintenance levels. Eleanor's pulse steadied her expression, turning razor-focused. He's trying to get beneath the airport. That's where the old access tunnels are. Rosen's eyes widened. Those are supposed to be sealed. Supposed to be, Eleanor echoed with a bitter undercurrent. Passengers listened in stunned silence, swept into the tension, like unwilling witnesses in a courtroom they never meant to enter. The man who had antagonized her earlier spoke again, but this time his voice wavered. What happens if he reaches those tunnels? Halstead answered before Eleanor could. It would take days to find him, maybe weeks, and a man like that running from exposure. He looked at Eleanor. She didn't look away. Is unpredictable. Before the words could settle, a metallic bang echoed somewhere under the aircraft, deep, hollow, unmistakable. Several passengers gasped. A woman clutched her husband's sleeve. Brandon spun around, eyes wide. What was that? Miguel whispered. Cole might be trying to access the cargo hold from underneath. Rosen's jaw tightened. That's impossible unless Eleanor finished the sentence for him. Unless he's already bypassed the lift lockouts. Everyone turned to her. How do you know that? Rosen demanded. Eleanor didn't blink. Because Arthur told me Cole had been tampering with access panels. That's why he started digging. Linda let out a shaky breath, connecting the dots. If Cole gets into the hold, he could destroy evidence. Eleanor nodded slowly. Or use it. A chill spread through the cabin, not loud, not dramatic, but creeping and primal, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees without warning. Rosen stepped closer to Eleanor. What are the odds he's dangerous? She met his gaze, unwavering. A man who hides safety failures is dangerous. A man who makes someone disappear over them is lethal. Rosen inhaled sharply, as though bracing against a blow. He turned toward the cockpit. I'm calling for an immediate lockdown of the lower deck." But before he could take a single step, the intercom crackled again with frantic urgency. "Security to all units suspect. Spotted entering service, Shaft Delta. Repeat, suspect entering service, Shaft Delta. Visual confirms missing mechanic Gerald Cole. Armed with unknown tool." Armed. The cabin stiffened like a held breath. Eleanor closed her eyes just for a moment. A quiet, steadying breath. Then she opened them, and something inside her had shifted, resolve hardening into action. She stepped forward with controlled precision, addressing Rosen directly. "Captain, you need to pull the circuit relays for the forward cargo lift now. If Cole's down there, he's looking for leverage. The last thing we need is him triggering a forced manual release." Rosen hesitated, torn between protocol and the clarity in her voice. "Ms. Brooks, if I start pulling circuits without command approval, you won't lose your license," Eleanor said. "Not today. Not for protecting lives." Linda stared at Eleanor, stunned. "How do you know the lift can be overridden from Shaft Delta? Because I wrote the original assessment on that model's vulnerabilities." Her voice dropped heavy with memory. And Arthur redlined every risk point before he vanished. The revelation struck the cabin like a thunderbolt. Miguel whispered, awed, terrified. "You were the design auditor," Brandon murmured. "She wasn't just oversight. She was the architect of the oversight." Halstead leaned back, exhaling sharply. Good Lord, Eleanor didn't acknowledge any of it. She focused only on Rosen. "Captain," she said, "pull the relays." Rosen stared at her for a long 2 seconds, a silent exchange of authority trust and the gravity of lives hanging in the balance. Then he nodded, turned, and disappeared into the cockpit. The cabin trembled again, this time with the thrum of systems powering down section by section as Rosen cut auxiliary feeds to the cargo assembly. Lights flickered. A few passengers gasped. Eleanor didn't flinch. Linda pressed a hand to her chest. "If Cole is in the lift, he'll know something's wrong." "He already knows," Eleanor said. "That's why he's running." Through the windows, security trucks repositioned. Officers sprinted across the tarmac. Movement intensified everywhere, except inside the aircraft where time seemed to slow into uneasy stillness. Passengers sat transfixed, watching the world outside blur with urgency. Brandon stepped forward again, voice unsteady. "Miss Brooks, if he tampered with your brother's flight logs, if he realized Arthur was onto him," his throat tightened, "do you think Cole planned to disappear him permanently?" Eleanor's eyes darkened, a storm gathering behind them. "I think," she said quietly, "my brother found proof. Someone was profiting from skipping inspections. Proof worth silencing." The weight of it hit the passengers with grim clarity. Human negligence was one thing. Profit-driven sabotage was something else. Before anyone could respond, a new rumble shuddered through the fuselage, deep, resonant, like metal, resisting a force it wasn't built to withstand. Miguel shot to his feet. "That's the manual override lever." "Someone's pulling it." Brandon staggered back a step. If the rail releases while the plane's powered down, Eleanor finished the thought with a whispered, deadly certainty. "He'll bring the whole cargo cradle down." Silence swallowed the cabin whole. No one dared breathe. Outside, alarms wailed. Inside, Eleanor Brooks braced because the truth had finally surfaced. Gerald Cole wasn't destroying evidence. He was preparing his escape, and someone on this plane would have to stop him before the next shudder in the metal turned into catastrophe. The shuddering in the belly of the aircraft deepened, vibrating through the soles of every passenger's shoes. It wasn't loud, But it was wrong, that low metallic groan of machinery being forced against its will. A few overhead bins trembled. The blonde woman in row 4 gripped her husband's arm hard enough that her knuckles blanched. Miguel darted toward the mid-cabin access hatch, panic edging his voice. If he pulls the secondary release, the whole cargo cradle will drop 3 feet. That kind of impact can shear the lift bolts. Halstead stood leaning heavily on his cane, meaning what exactly Eleanor stepped forward before Miguel could answer. Meaning a fully loaded cargo tray will slam into the fuselage frame, not enough to tear through it, but enough to injure anyone below and destabilize the rail locking system. Brandon paled, and the maintenance crew is down there right now. That realization spread like ice through the cabin. People looked at the floor beneath their feet as if it might split. Fear crept in, not the frantic kind, but the slow, creeping dread of knowing danger is close and invisible. Captain Rosen burst from the cockpit, breath quick. Cargo lift relays are cut, but something's manually engaging the override from below. Security says Cole's in the shaft with a tool, probably the same one he used to bypass the lockouts. Linda swore under her breath. We need to pull the power from the auxiliary grid. Miguel shook his head violently. No, if you shut down that grid, the environmental systems in the cargo section lose pressure balance. If someone's in their security, or Cole, they'll be disoriented or worse. Then what Rosen snapped. For a moment, no one answered. The aircraft hummed with stress, an uneasy animal bracing against injury. Then Eleanor spoke. We don't cut the power, we cut his leverage. Rosen blinked, meaning Eleanor turned to Miguel. The service shaft delta. There's an access rung near the mid-joint coupling. Does it still have a restriction brace from older models? Miguel's eyes widened. Yes, the metal's old, but strong. If someone applies weight, it jams the manual release. Eleanor finished. Eleanor, temporarily. Miguel nodded, long enough for security to reach him. Rosen stared between the two of them. But someone has to get down there. Through the narrow hatch, passengers inhaled sharply. The narrow mid-cabin access hatch was barely 2 feet wide. No crew member in uniform could fit, especially not Rosen or Brandon. Slowly, reluctantly, every gaze turned to the one person who might. Miguel. His throat tightened. I can try. I'm small enough. He looked at Eleanor. But once I'm down there, I'll be in the same shaft as him. You won't confront him, Eleanor said steady. You're not security. You're just blocking the brace. Miguel nodded, but his eyes held fear. Honest, human fear. He looked younger in that moment, barely 26, the weight of responsibility pressing into his shoulders like hands. Halstead stepped forward, cane tapping once against the floor. The sound echoed through the still cabin. Son, he said to Miguel, you make sure you come back up. A hush passed over them. Even passengers who had judged earlier now stared with reverence. Miguel turned to Eleanor again, as if drawing strength from her. If I don't, you will, Eleanor said, cutting him off. Because you're going to listen to exactly what I tell you. You're not going down there to stop a criminal. You're going down to keep people alive. That's different. He swallowed hard, then nodded with new determination. Brandon unlocked the narrow mid-cabin hatch as Rosen radioed ground security to coordinate movement. The metal panel opened with a hiss, releasing a gust of cool air from the belly of the aircraft. Darkness loomed below, tight mechanical labyrinthine. Miguel climbed in, feet first, gripping the rung. He glanced up one last time. Eleanor met his eyes. Steady, she said. 3 rungs down. then shift left. Don't look down the shaft. You'll feel the brace with your left foot. When you do, press your weight until you hear a click. Miguel nodded, drew a staggered breath, and disappeared into the darkness. As the hatch closed above him, the entire cabin held its breath. The groaning from below grew sharper, more frantic. Cole was working faster now, desperate, knowing time was running out. Eleanor stepped closer to the hatch, listening. The vibrations were uneven, dangerously so. Each one seemed to pulse through her bones like echoes of her brother's warning. The blonde woman whispered, "How does she know all this?" Halstead answered quietly. "Because someone in her position has seen what happens when people cut corners, and she's lived through the cost." Rosen approached her. "Ms. Brooks, what aren't you telling us?" Eleanor didn't turn. She kept her focus on the metal beneath her feet. Arthur didn't disappear by accident. He was taken off the roster, misrouted, flagged as a no-show. Not because he missed a flight. Her voice thinned into something colder. Because he found proof a mechanic was falsifying load reports and selling access clearances. Rosen's breath stilled. "Selling access to whom? To anyone who wanted a shortcut," she said. "Anyone who wanted to slip cargo through inspection. Anyone who wanted to tamper with a manifest without raising flags." Linda stared at her horror, widening her eyes. "You think Cole was paid?" "I think Eleanor said softly that my brother caught him taking money to bypass safety protocols, and that he died for it." A rush of gasps filled the cabin. Passengers covered their mouths. One man whispered, "This is bigger than negligence. This is criminal." Eleanor didn't soften. Criminal doesn't begin to cover it. Suddenly, thunk! A sharp vibration shot upward through the floor. "He's pulling harder," Brandon said. "We're running out of time." Another thunk, louder, more violent. Then a faint metallic click. Inside the hatch, Miguel's voice echoed through the small opening. "I found it. I'm on it." Relief broke across Brandon's face, like sunlight. Halstead let out a long breath. Linda pressed a hand to her heart. But Eleanor didn't relax. She knelt beside the hatch, pressing her hand to the floor, feeling the vibration shift, feeling something Miguel couldn't see. "Miguel," she called down quietly. "Don't move." "What I thought." "Don't move," she repeated firmer. The vibration changed. Cole felt the brace engage. Miguel froze. Up above, the passengers went silent once more. Then, through the metal came a new sound. Not machinery, a human voice, a man's voice. Low, close, too close. "Cole." Miguel whispered, terrified. "He's right below me." The entire cabin felt it. The shift from danger to confrontation, from fear to imminent violence. Eleanor leaned closer to the hatch, her voice low, calm, lethal. "Miguel, listen to me. Whatever you do, do not answer him." Why his whisper trembled. "Because he's not talking to you," she said. "He's talking to who he thinks is your brother." Linda's hand flew to her mouth. Brandon staggered back. Rosen froze. Halstead closed his eyes in pained understanding. Eleanor lowered her voice into the hatch, each word a blade. "He thinks Arthur came back to expose him," Miguel whimpered. Another sound echoed upward, a scraping metal shift as Cole climbed. Closer and closer. Eleanor's voice dropped into a cold steel whisper that sent chills up every spine in the cabin. "Miguel, stay silent. Let him climb." Because the moment he reaches the brace, she rose slowly to her feet. "I will end this." Miguel's breath rasped through the narrow shaft, each inhale a jitter of fear, ricocheting off metal walls. The dark below him shifted with movement, a climbing rhythm, slow but deliberate, the sound of a man ascending toward the brace where Miguel perched frozen. The faint scrape of Cole's boots on steel rungs crawled up through the aircraft like the heartbeat of a predator closing in. Above the hatch, the cabin had gone still again. But this stillness was different, a live electric bracing itself around the tension, threading up from the belly of the aircraft. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, held in the grip of an unfolding truth none of them could have predicted when they arrived at gate C-32. Eleanor stood motionless, eyes locked on the sealed hatch, her breath measured. Everything about her posture said she had stepped out of the role of passenger long ago. She was now something colder, sharper, someone who had walked into danger before and learned to stop trembling. "Eleanor," Captain Rosen whispered, "what exactly is your plan when he reaches that brace?" She didn't look at him, to stop him from destabilizing the lift, and to bring him out alive if possible. If possible. Brandon echoed fear rising. "He's cornered," Eleanor said quietly. "Cornered people don't take options. They take damage." Linda stepped closer. "Ms. Brooks, you don't have tactical authority on board. You can't engage him." Eleanor's voice was steady. "I'm not engaging him. I'm controlling the environment." From inside the shaft, Miguel stifled a gasp as Cole climbed another rung, the sound bringing them painfully close. A faint whisper floated upward, sinister trembling with paranoia. "You think hiding on the brace will save you," Cole muttered below. "You think this ends with you walking out of here?" Miguel pressed himself against the metal, trying to make himself smaller, his hands trembling so violently the rung shuddered beneath him. Eleanor knelt beside the hatch again, her tone shifting, not loud, but commanding, in a way that froze even the air. "Miguel, don't acknowledge him. Don't move. Keep your weight steady, or the brace will slip." Miguel squeezed his eyes shut. "He's talking like he knows me. He thinks you're Arthur," Eleanor said. "His guilt is pulling ghosts out of the dark." The man who had insulted Eleanor earlier leaned forward in row 5, his voice shaky. "Ms. Brooks, he thinks your brother is still alive." "He thinks Arthur didn't die," she said quietly. "He thinks someone survived his sabotage." Her eyes hardened. "He thinks the person climbing above him is the one who finally came to expose him." Another rung creaked. Cole was closer now, so close Miguel could smell industrial grease drifting upward. Rosen stepped in front of Eleanor, lowering his voice. "I need to know how you're this certain. How did you know the brace existed? The bypass paths, the access grid?" "This kind of knowledge goes beyond oversight. It goes beyond auditing." Eleanor rose slowly to her full height. Her expression didn't waver, but something enormous moved behind her eyes, a history she had kept buried until now. "I didn't just audit the system," she said. "I designed the safety protocols that are being violated. Arthur and I built the first-generation oversight framework 15 years ago, before it was fragmented, before budget cuts stripped out the protections." She inhaled deeply. "Every loophole Cole exploited, he exploited from a structure I helped create." A ripple moved through the passengers like a wave in a tight corridor. Halstead shook his head slowly in awe. "My God, you're not oversight. You're origin." But before anyone could speak again, a loud metallic jolt boomed up the shaft. Miguel flinched violently. He's right under my feet," Eleanor's voice cut the air. "Miguel, listen. Shift your weight to your left heel, not your whole body, only the heel. Do it now." Miguel obeyed, sweat dripping down his temples. A small, sharp lock click snapped through the floor. Brandon gasped. "What was that?" Eleanor's eyes didn't blink. The brace just sealed the manual release into neutral. Cole won't be able to drop the cradle now. From below, Cole snarled, a guttural, frustrated sound echoing through the shaft. "You're not Arthur," he spat. "You're someone else. Who the hell are you?" Linda put a hand over her mouth. "He's panicking, no," Eleanor corrected. "He's realizing he lost control." Suddenly Cole's tone shifted, dripping with fury. "You think whoever you are, you can stop this. You don't know what you're stepping into. This whole place is rotten. You can't fix the rot." Eleanor's voice dropped into the hatch, cold, lethal, unwavering. "I don't have to fix the rot," she said. "I only need to expose the rot." Cole froze. Passengers felt it a moment, like a held breath before a storm breaks open. Then Cole whispered, almost reverent, "You're Brooks, the other one. He talked about you. Said you'd come if anything happened to him." His voice cracked. "I tried to warn him, tried to tell him to back down." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "You killed him." "No." Cole shouted, his voice ricocheting up the shaft. "I didn't. I tried to scare him off. I never meant—" The aircraft shuddered again, as if reacting to the lie. Linda stepped closer, whispered urgently to Eleanor. "He's unstable. If he thinks he's cornered, he might—" "He's not cornered yet," Eleanor said. "He's bargaining." Cole's voice softened, trembling with confusion, fear, guilt. "I didn't want anyone else hurt. It got out of hand. The wrong people were pushing me." Eleanor stiffened. "What people?" "Silence. The kind that smothers rather than settles." Miguel's whisper broke it. He stopped climbing. Rosen leaned toward the hatch. "Cole, stay where you are. Security is approaching the access corridor. You need to—" A metallic clang cut him off. Then another. Then a long, shaking exhale floated upward from the shaft. Cole had started climbing again, but not upward. Downward, trying to flee. Linda gasped. "They're going to lose him." "No," Eleanor said. "They won't." She grabbed the intercom handset from the galley wall with a speed that startled everyone. With a few coded taps and override, she should not have known she cut into the airport's ground channel frequency. Then she spoke. Her voice filled not the cabin air, but the entire operations grid. "This is Eleanor Brooks. Gerald Cole is in Shaft Delta descending toward the southeast utility crosspoint. He's heading for the unsealed drainage lock. Block the junction now." A chorus of startled voices from the other end responded instantly. How did she is that, the Eleanor Brooks, lock the shaft? The airport snapped into action, like a body responding to a long-forgotten reflex. Rosen stared at her stunned. "How did you access that channel?" Eleanor lowered the handset, her voice raw but steady. "Arthur and I built the clearance system. We embedded backdoor access for emergencies." Miguel whispered from the hatch. "They're sealing it. I hear it. The gates are closing." Linda exhaled a shuttered breath of relief. "He's trapped." "No," Eleanor said softly, a grief-laced truth cutting through the air. "He's cornered." A final metallic crash reverberated up through the floor, something heavy striking steel. Then silence. Not the tense, expectant silence from before. A silence that felt like the air itself, holding its breath for the next blow. Every passenger sat rigid. Every crew member froze. Miguel whispered, terrified, "Eleanor, he's not moving." Eleanor closed her eyes just for a moment to gather the strength she'd need for whatever came next. Then she opened them, turned toward Rosen, and spoke with cold, unwavering purpose. "Get him out of there," she said, "alive or dead." Because the truth she'd been chasing had finally hit metal, and now it was time to face it. The retrieval took longer than anyone expected. longer than the tension in the cabin could stretch without snapping. For 20 agonizing minutes, the aircraft floor vibrated with the muffled thuds of security teams descending into the sealed shaft, the metallic echoes moving like distant thunder beneath the passengers' feet. Every sound made people flinch. Every silence made them hold their breath harder. Eleanor remained standing at the front galley, hands clasped loosely before her gaze fixed on the hatch. She didn't blink much. She didn't shift her weight. It was as if she had anchored herself to that single point, the doorway to the truth. Finally, the radio on Linda Farrow's hip crackled alive. Operations to Director Farrow. We reached the lower access. We found him. Linda stiffened. Status A, long static-filled pause. Unconscious. Pulse present but faint. Severe tool impact trauma, possibly self-inflicted, after the gate sealed. We're stabilizing him. Requesting paramedics on site. A stunned ripple passed through the cabin. Self-inflicted. Not a fight. Not a shootout. Not a dramatic standoff. A man cornered by his own guilt and fear, crushed under the weight of a truth he couldn't outrun. Eleanor closed her eyes only once, a single moment of deep exhale. Not relief. Not vindication. Something closer to grief. Linda raised the radio again. Secure his tools. And I want photographs of every panel he touched, every bolt, every relay. Nothing leaves that scene until Ms. Brooks reviews it. The security officer on the other end hesitated. Ma'am, with respect, is she authorized for that level of review? Linda looked at Eleanor, her voice steady. She is now. She clipped the radio back to her belt, turned toward the cabin, and addressed the passengers. Folks, thank you for staying calm. The situation is under control, but we will be holding at the gate until all safety verifications are complete. Please remain seated. The passengers actually listened. No grumbling. No demands. The crisis had changed them, knitting their silence into something respectful. Brandon approached Eleanor tentatively, like someone approaching a lioness who had just fought a hunt. Ms. Brooks, do you want to sit, maybe get some water? No, she said softly. Standing helps me think. Brandon looked at her a second longer, then nodded and stepped away, shaken by the quiet force in her voice. Across the aisle, the man who had shouted accusations earlier struggled to stand. He hobbled toward her slowly, not out of entitlement this time, but humility. Ms. Brooks, he began, voice rough, I owe you more than an apology. I judged you without knowing anything. I spoke like a damned fool. Eleanor didn't look at him, didn't offer him the balm of forgiveness he silently begged for, but her voice came gentle. You're not the first person to make that mistake, she said, and you won't be the last. What matters is what you do with the understanding you have now. The man swallowed hard and nodded, sinking back into his seat with a soft, broken sigh. Judge Halstead rose, then his cane thudding once on the carpet, before he made his slow way toward her. Ms. Brooks, he said, if you need legal observation for the interviews or evidence chains, I'll stay. I'm retired, but I know enough to keep the process clean. Eleanor finally turned to face him. Her expression softened, touched by a rare flicker of gratitude. Thank you, Judge. I may need that. Consider it done. As he returned to his seat, Rosen emerged from the cockpit, face drawn but steadier now. Ms. Brooks, he said, security has him in custody. They're moving him to a medical unit. They want you to review the scene as soon as they secure the tools. Eleanor nodded. I'll go when they're ready. Rosen hesitated. There's something else. They found a personal locker key in his pocket. Belongs to the off-hours maintenance bay. Miguel inhaled sharply. That's where the tampered logs might be stored. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. Or where Arthur left his final report. The possibility electrified the air. Linda stepped closer. Ms. Brooks, if your brother left something behind, a file or a note, it could explain everything. Why Cole panicked. Why he tried to hide your clearance. Eleanor's gaze drifted downward to the metal beneath her feet, the same metal her brother had walked over, studied, trusted. If Arthur left a message, she said softly, he left it, because he knew I'd come looking. Then through the hatch, a faint metallic echo traveled up into the cabin. A tool being lifted, a panel being sealed, someone calling for a stretcher. Eleanor's head tilted slightly, listening with a stillness that made the passengers hold their breath again. Miguel stepped near her. Ms. Brooks, do you want me to go with you when they let you down there? I know the shafts well. She turned to him, her expression gentler than before. You already risked more than I had the right to ask. You stay here. Miguel shook his head. I'm not afraid. That's not the point, Eleanor replied. I need you here because people trust you now. If this plane moves again today, they'll need someone they believe in. Miguel blinked fast, eyes burning. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not a supervisor. Not a captain. No one. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. The hatch sealed with a heavy final thump as the last technician climbed out. A security officer appeared in the doorway, radio in hand. Ms. Brooks, he said. They're ready for you downstairs. A hush fell across the cabin as Eleanor stepped forward. Passengers watched her with reverence, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it in a way few people ever do. Through courage, through clarity, through grief that did not break her, but sharpened her. As she reached the front galley, Rosen paused her with a hand on her arm. Mrs. Brooks, whatever's down there, you don't have to face it alone. She looked at him. This man responsible for the lives aboard his aircraft, shaken but resolute, and she saw in him something she hadn't seen in years. Integrity. You'll stay ready, she said. It wasn't a question. Always, he replied. She gave the faintest nod, then followed the security officer toward the lower deck access. As she stepped through the doorway, Halstead murmured to the passengers, That woman has walked through fire before, and she's going straight back into it now. The door closed behind her with a soft, hydraulic hiss. Up in the cabin, the passengers did not know what she would find below. But Eleanor Brooks knew. Somewhere in that dim metal labyrinth between falsified logs and broken safety rails, the truth waited for her. And for the first time since Arthur vanished, she was close enough to touch it. The elevator descended with a low mechanical groan, its cage rattling against the cold concrete shaft as Eleanor stood perfectly still, hands clasped before her eyes, fixed on the narrowing gap of light above. The air grew cooler the deeper she went, tinged with the metallic scent of oil, steel, and secrets buried longer than anyone wanted to admit. When the elevator finally jolted to a stop, the gate slid open with a reluctant clatter, revealing the dim corridor that led to the off-hours maintenance bay. A strip of flickering fluorescent lights cast uneven shadows against the floor, each flicker cutting the darkness into sharp, trembling shapes. Security waited for her 3 officers in dark uniforms, their faces tense. One of them, Lieutenant Harris, stepped forward. Ms. Brooks, he said, keeping his voice steady. Cole is in medical custody. He's conscious now, but he's not speaking. His tools and belongings have been collected. The locker you requested access to is here. He gestured toward a metal door at the far end of the corridor, its surface scarred by decades of use, a padlock hanging from it like an accusation. Eleanor walked toward it without hesitation. Her footsteps echoed along the corridor, each one matching the memory of her brother's stride, a memory so vivid she could almost hear him beside her. Arthur explaining the flaws in the early oversight systems, his voice half amused, half frustrated, always brilliant. She pushed the thought down and focused on the lock. Harris handed her the key found in Cole's pocket. The small, cold piece of metal felt heavier than it should. She fitted it into the lock, turned it, and the padlock snapped open with a dull metallic click. Inside the locker was small, cramped and cluttered with tools, worn gloves, old manifests, plastic binders stained with grease, and a half-empty thermos on its side. But one item stood out immediately, a sealed manila envelope bearing a handwritten label in her brother's unmistakable block letters. Eleanor Brooks. Her breath tightened. The noise of the corridor faded until she could hear nothing but her heartbeat, steady and relentless. She reached for the envelope with steady hands. The paper was cold, slightly stiff as though it had been handled recently, but tucked away in haste. She peeled the seal open, careful not to tear Arthur's writing. Inside was a stack of printed maintenance logs, handwritten annotations in red ink, and a flash drive taped to the top sheet. Arthur had always used red ink, even when they were children, even when they argued late into the night over oversight principles or when they dreamed up fail-safes that might outlast them. Her hands trembled just once. The first sheet was a diagram of the cargo rail system. She knew the schematic intimately, but Arthur's notes added a second story, a story of bypassed inspections, overridden safety locks, missing timestamps, and mismatched signatures leading straight to Cole. But it wasn't just Cole. Arthur's annotations pointed to a second name, a supervisor, someone who had authorized Cole's rushed workflows for the past 3 months. And there it was, circled in red. Supervisor D. Farrow. Eleanor froze. Linda Farrow, the woman who had escorted her onto the aircraft, the woman who had asked her to speak privately, the woman who had helped block Cole's escape. A cold current ran down her spine. She flipped through the next few pages. More logs, more signatures, more red circles. Every single falsified inspection had been approved by Farrow before Cole signed off the final clearance. Arthur had written only one note beside her name. She knows. A faint hum echoed through the corridor, but Eleanor barely noticed it now. Her mind was assembling the pieces faster than her hands could move through them. Cole hadn't acted alone. He'd been protected, shielded, and someone above him had made sure the errors never reached audit. Someone who now stood at the center of an airport lockdown, pretending to be part of the solution. Lieutenant Harris approached carefully. "Ms. Brooks, do you need more time?" Eleanor slid the envelope under her arm and stepped out of the locker. "No, I need to see Director Farrow." Harris hesitated. They moved her upstairs for debriefing. "She's waiting outside operations." "Good," Eleanor said. "Take me to her." The walk back to the elevator felt longer, every echo a reminder of the truth in her hand. Harris and the 2 other officers kept pace, their expressions shifting as they noticed the tension sharpening in her posture. When the elevator doors opened again at the main concourse level, faint chatter from the airport filtered through the uneasy murmurs of passengers, the clipped radio calls from staff, the heavy steps of security mobilizing. Linda Farrow stood near the glass wall, overlooking the tarmac. Arms crossed, jaw-clenched eyes, scanning the runway as though searching for reassurance. She turned at the sound of footsteps, and her face softened with relief. "Ms. Brooks," she began, "we're coordinating the evidence preservation process. I need your confirmation on." Eleanor held out the envelope. Linda faltered. "What is you already know?" Eleanor said. Linda blinked once. Twice. Her composure wavered just slightly. Harris stepped forward. "Director Ms. Brooks has recovered evidence implicating additional personnel in the misconduct. We need to clarify your involvement." "My involvement?" Linda repeated, voice too sharp, too quick. "Lieutenant, I was facilitating her clearance. I've been assisting with containment since Cole tried to escape," Eleanor said calmly, "which he wouldn't have needed to do if someone hadn't signed his falsified logs." Linda stiffened. "Those logs were not signed by me. I authorized routine inspections, nothing more." "You authorized every bypass he performed," Eleanor said. "My brother documented it. He left proof. In your handwriting." Linda's jaw snapped shut, eyes darting between Eleanor and the security officers. "I was told the logs were legitimate. Cole said we were behind schedule. He said he needed flexibility." "You gave him that flexibility?" Eleanor replied, voice soft but devastating, and people could have died for it. A tremor ran through Linda's hands. She masked it quickly, but not quickly enough. Harris noticed. He stepped closer. "Director Farrow," he said, "I need you to come with us." Linda swallowed. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," Eleanor answered, "that my brother disappeared after confronting Cole, and the last person he reported to was you." The corridor fell silent. Linda's lips parted, a single breath escaping, then another. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of something collapsing inside her, a lie she could no longer hold upright. "I didn't hurt him," she whispered. "I swear to you. I only told him to stop digging. I didn't know Cole would." Eleanor didn't flinch. "You knew enough." Linda's face crumpled. Harris signaled the officers. They escorted her away, her steps unsteady, her voice a muted string of protests swallowed by the hallway. When they disappeared from view, Eleanor finally exhaled. It wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. It was the release that comes when truth stops running. She walked toward the window, watching the tarmac below the flashing lights of security vehicles still circling the aircraft she had stepped onto as just another traveler. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her brother's handwriting peeking from the envelope. "Arthur," she whispered, "I found it." Captain Rosen approached quietly. "They told me. They said you broke it open." Eleanor didn't turn. He warned them. They didn't listen. Rosen nodded. "They'll listen now." Maybe she murmured. "But listening isn't the point. Changing is." He hesitated, then asked gently, "Are you ready to return to the plane?" She finally faced him, the weight of grief and resilience resting together in her eyes. "Yes," she said. "There are passengers waiting who deserve to know they're safe." Rosen offered a quiet, respectful nod and gestured toward the jet bridge. As they walked, airport staff watched her with a mixture of awe and gratitude, the kind one reserves for someone who stood between danger and hundreds of unsuspecting souls. When Eleanor re-entered the aircraft, every head turned, not with fear this time, with reverence. Miguel rose first, eyes wide with hope. Halstead followed, leaning on his cane, offering her a solemn nod. Brandon's shoulders eased for the first time in an hour. Eleanor stepped into the aisle and let her voice carry gently through the cabin. "It's over," she said. "The threat is contained. You're safe now." Relief swept the cabin like warm air, and Eleanor, battle-worn, grieving, resolute, took her seat at last. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If it moved you, or made you think differently about the hidden heroes around us, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with 3 words in English.